Suite de ces rencontres panafricaines consacrées au dessin de presse.
So now we are going to carry on with this second panel discussion. We are going to see how humor and images can deal with the current news for a continent which has undergone major upheavals. So we are going to hear reference in their countries. Alaa Satir from Sudan. Good afternoon. Nadia Chiari, Willis from Tunisia. Zohoré from Gbish in Côte d'Ivoire. Good afternoon. And finally, Godfrey Gado from Tanzania. From Kenya, sorry. So each of you has been very active, and you are like journalists. Nadia, we can say that the Jasmine Revolution was born in your country. When I started to publish my drawings on social networks as early as January 2011, after a speech from the president promising freedom of speech, I thought that I should start posting my cartoons on Facebook, and then, it went out of control. So that was for your relatives, for your family, and the escaped creature. Yes, it's like the Frankenstein beast. So what is the current situation in Tunisia? Could you please comment those illustrations, because that's the best way to understand the meaning. Those pictures were taken at the beginning of 2011 when Ben Ali escaped Tunisia with his family and his family-in-law. They left their palaces, their houses, their huge villas. They were looted by the population. But they were also visited by people because people were curious. They wanted to see where the public spending was going to. And with a group of graphers that I was doing graphism with, we thought that the best place to convey a political message was those houses. So we invested those houses. We have redone the decoration. You are a teacher of plastic arts. At the time, you thought you were like an activist in this movement? Well, through my discipline, cartooning, I decided to talk about things that are dear to me, to be part of supporting groups, to carry out awareness campaigns, and I'm quite dynamic in the Tunisian civil society with some associations. This Tunisian civil society is doing the job of the government, so we're there to do that job. To censor censorship, is it still a reality in Tunisia today? And this cat is still accompanying the revolution. Yes, the revolution is still underway, in people's mind, because in reality, the Ben Ali system is still in place. Even if Ben Ali has left, the system is still in place and is being used by other people. And they are repressing freedom with violent police and corrupt one, and an administration which is quite cumbersome, and sometimes they are racketing people. So it's quite complicated. Freedom of speech is there. It might be the only achievements of that revolution, but it is being limited by laws. In the new constitution, you cannot talk about religion, armed forces, the police. There are many things that you cannot attack. And there are laws from the Ben Ali time that were there to silence the opposition, like today, against, you cannot go against the good habits, and you will be sentenced to 1 year to prison for smoking cannabis in Tunisia. And there are two bloggers, one of them that did mount something against the current president. He's going to be sentenced by a military court. And so you do continue to draw for Tunisians and not only for your relatives, because there was a reason for the cap. As long as we can express ourselves, we will be able to denounce all problems in our country. So that freedom of speech is extremely important. And by practicing it, I make it survive. And not only the press illustrators are the guarantee, but everybody should use it. Alaa Satir, you were born in 1970 in Sudan, 1990 in Sudan, and till the Sudanese revolution, that was 2 years ago. How did you go through those events?
Of course, yeah. I was born into the previous regime, so this is the only thing that we knew. This is the only thing we were familiar with. And to some extent, of course, growing up in these type of conditions, never experiencing any other government, you start to normalize certain things. You start to feel like this is something that's going to be inevitable, that's going to be lasting forever. That's why the previous revolution, until, like, even though when we were protesting and going out every day and we were in the middle of it, still the idea of getting rid of that regime, that we became part of our reality, that's the older reality we knew, felt like it was very far-fetched. So yeah, that's how it felt like.
Vous étiez au milieu de ce mouvement, dites-vous. You were in the middle of this struggle, and at the same time, it's the only thing that you had ever knew. How do you explain this sort of discrepancy? Comment vous expliquez cet écart entre le fait de n'avoir jamais rien connu d'autre et en même temps ce besoin vital?
How can you explain that discrepancy between the fact that you had never known anything else, but you wanted to be part of that movement? And we're going to see it with your cartoons.
Maybe the fact that we don't know anything but that government is a good reason why you want to get rid of it. It's not normal for someone who's lived 30 years in a country not to have experienced leaders come and go. You see it, and you see every time that it gets more and more exploitative, that they use things that are sacred for our society, for example, like religion and other things, to exploit these very sacred terms to their benefit, and it just makes it. I think that what you feel is just it makes it easier it makes it harder for you to imagine a different reality, and we're still trying to imagine a different reality because we are figuring it out as we go. Like the current transitional government comes with its advantages and like negatives and positives, but at the same time we are just trying not to find ourselves in the same loop of being under another dictatorship that will last always for years, also for years. So it's kind of taught us and taught everyone who was fighting against the previous regime that you have to be critical of the things that you see right away. You have to stand against anything that violates your freedom and your right to live and exist freely in your own country. And this is a new freedom that we're still practicing, and we hope that we get to a point where it is the vision that we had from the beginning. But we're still of course it's a work in progress, and we're still seeing how it goes.
You felt that drawings and cartoons were the natural way for you to express your feelings and your objectives. How do you react to the fact that it resonates with so many people in your country? Comment expliquez-vous le fait que ce qui vous a semblé, vous, naturel, le fait de dessiner et trouver une telle résonance, un tel écho auprès des Soudanais, en fait, des habitants de votre pays?
Yeah, I am an artist, and I'm someone who's been creative almost my whole life. So, and that's how I express myself. I'm not amazing with words or any other means of expression. So cartoons and drawings was the way for me to express how I feel about things that I didn't agree with in my own society or in the government or whatever. It was a way to, a coping mechanism. It was a way to blow some steam. And during the revolution, it was seriously the only thing that we thought about. It's what's going to happen, when is the protest, going out for protest. That's all it took over our life for an entire year. It didn't make sense to draw about anything else. It didn't make sense even to be in the headspace to think about anything else. So it also makes sense that it will reflect in my work. And I saw things that out in the street that I wanted to reflect in my work, especially like the women movement and everything that was happening with it. And the people who it resonates with are people who are living these events with me. So it also makes sense that they saw themselves reflected in these kind of drawings. Yeah.
Nowadays, as Sudan is heading towards a civilian power, hopefully. How do you see your role? Do you see yourself as a role model, as a militant, as a journalist? À mesure que le Soudan avance vers un pouvoir civil, c'est le sens de ce pouvoir de transition aujourd'hui, comment percevez-vous votre rôle auprès de la jeune
How do you see the role you're playing with the young generation of Sudanese people?
I see myself as an artist who uses her work as a way to express my reality, and my reality is being Sudanese, living in Sudan for most of my life. So I'm gonna keep using that tool. That's a tool my tool of self-expression, and that's how I try to figure out myself and how to figure out the situation that I'm in. I don't know if I see myself particularly as a role model or something like that, but I put work out there, and it resonates with few people who live almost the same reality that I live in. And if that resonates with them and that makes them feel a certain way or advocates them towards certain causes, then yeah, that's great.
Do you feel that you carry some weight in a sense that the revolution will eventually succeed? Do you feel that you have an impact on the events as they unfold? Est-ce que vous avez le sentiment de peser sur le cheminement de cette révolution, vous en tant qu'artiste reconnu?
To an extent, because I am a citizen at the end of the day, and for this revolution to succeed or to reach where we want it to reach, it's of course my responsibility and responsibility of every Sudanese person who lives either in Sudan or outside of Sudan. So there is a sense of responsibility in that sense, yeah.
And you have your own goal or fight, so to speak, is gender equality. Yes. L'égalité homme-femme, c'est véritablement votre cheval de bataille.
Yeah, I think the situation in Sudan for women is something that's unfortunately gets worse with time, and it's something that because it's always been pushed to the side, and that's why most of my drawings during the revolution was kind of to make shed light on what women are doing to better their lives living in Sudan. Because whenever we talk about women's rights, even in the middle of the revolution, even when we are out there chanting freedom, justice, and freedom and equality, it's still when we talk about women equality, people tend to say like, that's not the time to talk about it. Let's talk about more important things. And it's not, they go hand in hand. We're not going out there just to dismantle a regime of dictatorship that put women always at a disadvantage. We're also talking about a social order that always put women at disadvantage as well. For women, even going out there in the streets to protest was a battle because they're dealing with a system at home that refuses for them to be out there in the street chanting with men. And to see that the Sudanese revolution was led by women and at the forefront were women, that's not just, that's a big image. That's not something just to take lightly. That means that they have more reasons to go out there because they're dealing with so many systems at once. And so we're not just talking about one government that's gonna go away and suddenly it's gonna be all good for us. We're talking about families, we're talking about a social order, we're talking about a lot of systems at once working together to kind of silence us in a way, put our rights in not as a priority. So it's important to just keep these chants and keep these demands that came from women alive, and to, in a way, document them, in a way to not let them die. Because even if another government came along, even if we reach the civilian government, that doesn't mean that the women's revolution is over. It's going to keep going. Yeah.
And there is no such thing as wrong timing for gender equality.
And definitely not. Yeah.
Zohoré, vous, on peut dire que vous n'avez pas choisi la facilité.
Zohoré, you did not go for easy things. You launched Bitch in 1999. What does Bish mean? It's a specific sound. Yes, it's a specific sound. In fact, there was a discussion before we launched the newspaper. When we were students, we had a teacher telling us that the press illustration did not exist in Côte d'Ivoire, and comics did not exist. And so if we wanted it, we had to use our own phrases, but we had learned Tintin and Let Le Rock. So when we decided to launch Bitch, we looked for the equivalent of PAF here in... PAF is like you slap somebody, the sound of slapping somebody in the face. No, but we say Bish. So that's the reason why we chose this. So 1999, that's when Henri Conan-Bénier was toppled by General Gay. Then there were 2 decades of crisis. The country was divided. How did you find your place as a press cartoonist? When Henri Conan-Bénier was in power in 1999, before the military coup, we had serious problems. To print the newspapers was complicated. I was working in a pro-governmental newspaper, and these were the only ones that I could convince to print me. So I went to see the manager, who was like a father for me, and he said he was in agreement, but I had to give some deposit. So I was working little jobs, so I told all these people not to pay me, but to send the money directly to the newspaper's account. And that's how the governmental newspaper accepted to print me. But since it was a governmental newspaper, you could not openly criticize it. You had to go slowly, and you had to conquer your freedom of speech very slowly. When the military coup took place, that was our front page. But you know what people have remembered? FIA. They call it FIA. That's when Bish become popular. We did it over the phone. When the military people did the coup, we could not move around in the city. So over the phone, I called the different my fellow workers, and I told them what to do. And when we met, the newspaper was ready, all the articles were ready, the cartoons were ready, and that's how we managed to do this. This is General Gay. He's chasing the rebels. So during those 2 decades, have you managed to remain balanced, because not to be sided on... well, in fact, I think we've managed, because sometimes people are telling us that, we are supporting a given leader, and once I attended a discussion in a bookstore, I was going through the magazines, and then I heard somebody said, Bish is for Ouattara, and another one said, no, they are for Gbagbo. So in fact, by lamponing all players, After the crisis, during the post-electoral crisis, my niece, my wife's niece, was at home, and she had a military as a neighbor. And he called her, he said, so you are with the boss of Bish, who is he supporting? And he said, no, he doesn't talk about politics at home. I said, no, please let me know. Tell me, I just want to know. In fact, they were trying to, listen to people or trying to find out who people were supporting, but she didn't say anything. So today, with the recent presidential election, the third mandate, 2 prime ministers who died, and Guillaume Soro, who was convicted last week. Is it a very fertile ground for cartoonists? Very fertile, very fertile. Well, you know, and the happiness of some people make other people unhappy and vice versa. You know, if there are no events, we lose our job. So, in fact, we accept that situation. Gado, you were born in Tanzania, but it is in Kenya that you became popular with press illustrations. You look at the international news, but you don't hesitate to draw the national scene, like the president and his problems with international justice. Could you please tell us what were the consequences for you?
Yeah. First of all, I must say also I was a beneficiary of the changes that happened in '92 when the Kenya constitution was changed, and which allowed multi-party system in Kenya, and the press became much bolder. And it's a time when I started working in Kenya, and so there was the so-called wind of change, in which the press became bolder. And I was lucky enough to start working with the Daily Nation, which is fairly, even today, probably the largest newspaper in Eastern Central Africa. And so, and it commands a lot of respect and power. And so I was able to publish a lot of drawings slowly because there was a lot of agitation for press freedom and the other liberties. And so, in the sense, I rode the wave. And that carried on up to, one can say, up to 2002 when Kenya got the new constitution. That was now, again, you know, another leap which saw actually the press gaining more and more room in terms of, you know, what the press could do. And apart from the press cartoons, I mean, there are a lot of also, my newspaper basically printed a lot of actual stories that, that were very sensitive. And so that over the years also carried on a lot of other artists and journalists, so to speak. But also, even after the new constitution, we've also seen that over the years, these gains have been eroding, and that is very important. And we have seen also this in many African countries. So the important bit is always, when it comes to the press freedom, is always also to protect the gains that we have attained. I mean, that is also more challenging than even fighting for more. So that has been a challenge. I mean, I personally been sacked from a newspaper because of that. That, you know, there is still a case in court. I'm working with a different newspaper now. But that pressure is still there. I mean, as we are talking today, Kenya is going into an election next year, and we have seen over these last few years that also the press being captured in the sense of the interference from the politicians and the influence of politicians, especially those from the government side. And And that actually tends to limit and tends to limit the freedom of press. I think today my worry, again, as I said, is protecting these gains that over the years people have fought so much to attain, and people have died because of these gains. Generally speaking, with you know, if you are to look at the East African region, which most of the time I also represent, I come from Tanzania, but I work in Kenya, and I do a lot of drawings about the region. Kenya has always been, the press there has been ahead in terms of press freedom. But as I mentioned, we have seen that also being eroded, you know, in one way or the other, especially with the government in power. With the coming of the internet, we have seen, of course, that opening up. But also we have seen that also the government moving in there, arresting bloggers, arresting, threatening artists, and so forth. And so the challenge today, in my view, remained the very same. In fact, probably more difficult in the sense that, you know, protecting these gains that we have had over the years has becoming more difficult than before.
On numerous occasions, you've depicted President Kenyatta, who was summoned by the International Criminal Court as a prisoner, and this has led, as you said, the Daily Nation to end your contract. How did you react to the fact that you became the subject of news itself? Because there has been, around the world, a movement of solidarity behind yourself. Many news factories rallied behind you. That was the case here in France, of Le Monde or Cartooning for Peace, for instance. Comment avez-vous réagi au fait de devenir vous-même, finalement, un sujet d'actualité?
So you're becoming at the center of current events, the fact that you have been kicked out of Daily Nation newspaper because you have represented the Kenyan president as a prisoner because he was, at the time, invited to go to the International Court in The Hague, post the...
I was also, again, very privileged because I did manage, because I belonged to Cartoonists for Peace, and I had already been working for this newspaper, a prominent newspaper, for some time. It was easy for me. I got fairly, my case was you know, highlighted across in many prominent newspapers across the world, and that was a very good thing. It was a culmination of things, and so what happened was, before, you know, the current administration at the time when I started drawing the president and his deputy with the ball and chain, it was when they were campaigning to become president and deputy president. And so it was, I suppose, when they won the election, it was inevitable that probably I was going to be a target. But I must also add that it was also not me alone. I mean, there were quite a number of other journalists who suffered and more viciously probably. They were sacked from their newspapers, they were intimidated, and of course some were coerced into working with the governments, and things like that. So the situation was much more intense when they came to power, and it made probably my job difficult. And the governments, especially in Africa, they have also a very interesting way of actually getting at newspapers. I mean, I suppose that happens also in many countries across the world. They can threaten the newspaper with advertising deals, and so that is easy because, you know, in many African countries, government is still the biggest advertiser with even private newspapers, and so they've used that tool to gain leverage over the newspapers. And so journalists and media practitioners like myself found themselves the sharp end of the stick, and I was let go. My contract was basically, it was agreed that I would take a sabbatical for 1 year and then, return to the newspaper, but that was not to be. And as I mentioned, I think that's still the case today. But also following up to that is that that also made the press, newspapers and the press much more afraid to confront the government in a much more direct way, much more afraid probably to take on the government, much more afraid probably to include columnists and media practitioners and journalists who are critical of the government. And so we've seen a situation where, yes, there is internet. A lot of journalists have also decided to publish, to use different platforms and put their stuff out there. But traditional newspapers and traditional media houses, they've made it difficult. And as I mentioned earlier, what you have seen is also the government has basically captured these institutions through coercion, through individuals, and so forth.
And for you to become a new subject matter, how did it feel? Like cumbersome, awkward?
It was very awkward. I mean, it was very awkward, I must say. It wasn't very good. I'm still not used to that. It's not something that you can get used to, of course, when you have, the journalists seeking you to interview you. You have journalists also going about to publish things. And so it was very cumbersome, but also the other thing was also you had also the government side and their supporters also, they used the social media also to say all manners of things about you. So it puts you and your family in a very awkward position because, they also put fake news, they put stuff out there that is not true, and you become part of it. So I had to learn how to deal with it. It's not easy. I still, from time to time, deal with it. But I think, as what is important is always to, keep your eye on the ball, especially in what you do. And in many ways, if you do that, that also insulates you from also from these politicians, and also, you are the so-called enemies from the other side.
L'Afrique un continent porteur pour le dessin de presse.
Is Africa is a boosting country for press cartoons. We have heard it with Billy the Kid in the previous roundtable. Long tradition in Africa through oral tales, but also through cartoons and drawings. Yes, of course. We don't have the same reality across Africa. What is funny in Côte d'Ivoire can be badly seen or regarded in the next country. We've been lucky for a long time. We have this long tradition of self-criticism. We deal with extreme cartoons, and it's where we sit. With people like Kofi Longo, this character of yours, you lampoon powerful people. There's so much I could tell you when you look closely at things, so much to look at. There's so much different situations when you look at Kofi Longo, my character. For one period, I was working in an advertising company in the business district, people with computers. One time I went to a restaurant, I saw a guy with a suitcase that he opened. It was not filed inside our documents. It was his food. It was his briefcase, and his food was inside. That inspired me to create this character. But in Côte d'Ivoire, we see funny situation at every street corner, even among politicians, because the politicians are the most funny character you see on the street. In Tunis, you have this freedom of expression that newspapers cannot allow, the fact that you're working out of newspapers. It's one way to share and to transfer a message, because when you make people smile or laugh, it's the opening of a dialogue, opening a discussion, so it softens the exchange. If I can make somebody who disagree with me laugh, it's a good beginning. Humor is very important, and satire, lampoon is very important. And you can share the same type of message while criticizing in a light way. You have the feeling you can deal with fields where journalists themselves cannot go by drawing. I'm not a journalist at all. I'm a Tunisian citizen using press release, press illustration. I work for two newspapers in France, for one in Tunisia. I choose the topics I like best. No boss is going to tell me this or that. I feel totally free to express myself freely, especially topics that journalists will not deal with. Daily life topics, discussions, events, anger. And I can see it through the work of my colleagues as cartoonists in Tunisia. Humor can make criticism more acceptable or more acceptable. Okay. Humor makes things that are not bearable more bearable. Humor makes things more bearable. I don't know if it's any useful. For the morale, it's very important. My current cartoons, I've seen disastrous situation in Tunisia. I don't know where to turn my head because we've got so many problems. So my only goal is to make people smile, to people in their rotten day. Alaa Satir, your cartoons, you can see it on this book called titled Africa. Typical cartoons, and it's not always humor. Sometimes it is more in symbol than in caricature.
I do use humor sometimes, but a lot of the times cartoons is a way to depict like a negative situation, and sometimes you just use symbolism and use other techniques to just try to get the message across and get them illustrate how negative it is. A lot of the times, though, I choose to draw women in more defiant positions other than place them as victims, while also try to point out the problems. Such as maybe this cartoons in the cover, it kind of shows that defiant side of women, or the strength in the way they're posing, because I feel like kind of we need these images as well. We need to. It's a way of empowerment, of showing another side, or seeing ourselves. You don't want to see sometimes if something that is a drawing that reflects you, you don't always want to see yourself in that vulnerable and victimized position. You want to see yourself sometimes as someone leading a revolution, or leading a protest, or someone who's standing up for yourself. And I think it depends, and sometimes I use this technique and sometimes I use other techniques, and yeah.
Do you follow closely the works from fellow cartoonists from the African continent? Est-ce que vous suivez de près le travail que font d'autres?
Do you follow closely the work of other cartoonists?
As much as I can, because it's the best way to kind of know what's happening in the region. At the same time, it just shows you how much every country has their unique situation happening, and how every cartoonist try to shed the light on the situation that's happening in their country is also a unique kind of approach. So it's always interesting to see what's happening in the region through the eyes of cartoonists who work there.
Each cartoonist has his or her own approach. However, would you say that there's a common not a common sense, but a common way to approach things? Or would you say that African cartoonists have a different view on the world than what we see from Westerners, for instance, or Asian cartoonists?
I don't think there is like one common way to draw a cartoon or to go about and explain a situation by a cartoon. I feel like every cartoonist have their unique vision. They have their own influences, and at the end of the day, we are artists, so you express yourself the way you see fit and the way you are, and there are other influences that is gonna affect me different than they're gonna affect other cartoonists. So I think no, it's not fair to put us all in like we follow one school or one technique or something. I think it's a different situation for every one of us. Yeah.
Gado, vous qui avez été victime
Gado, you have been a victim of censorship yourself because you've been laid off from the newspaper where you're using that cartoon, say things, talk to the general public in Kenya where the press remains quite free in your country, where press cannot deal with today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's... you know, one of the things that, you know, press cartoons do is that they are always sensitive subjects and in many societies, and Africa is no different. And so one of the things that cartoons have been able to do over the years is to be able to speak about these sensitive subjects in a you know, without fear or favor, but also most of the time also with the sensibilities that are required. And of course, most of the time, we have seen that actually pricking the different, whether the authority, religious leaders, and so forth. So, but definitely, personally, at the personal level, I've been able to discuss lots of other subjects that probably the print press would not dare to comment. There are, if it comes, for example, it comes to issue of religious issues, these are very touchy subjects in Africa, but I've been fairly able to discuss them. And of course, I've been actually long before the Mohammed cartoons in Denmark. I received threats from actually Muslims, and my newspaper was one time required to print an apology. You know, so I have been a victim of Muslim leaders, Christian leaders, Muslims and Christians. And for me, it's understandable. I understand the sensibilities involved in there. There are also issues like LGBTQ issues that are also always seen as a taboo. And I've been able to very much discuss them in my drawings. And so that is a very important element in African press. And now also we are seeing that in social media, because it basically also opens up the floor for discussions, the floor for critique, which you don't always say, which you don't always see in your day-to-day press.
So you have to explore all subjects, but you have to be cautious on how you do it?
I think I'm not cautious, but I like to say as a journalist and a media practitioner, I think I also have freedom of choice, and so I choose my subjects. I don't run away from any subjects, but I choose my subjects. And I think it's also important to mention that a lot of times speaking truth to power comes with certain responsibility too. And so in the world that I come from, that is always, you are always reminded of that, because yes, it is a responsibility whether you like it or not, as a cartoonist, because you are the one who can speak certain subjects than anybody else. So that's a responsibility, whether you like it or not. You are the one who can say this. We cannot say it. You can say it. That is a responsibility. And so I think I don't censor myself, but I weigh what I put out there, and for right reasons.
La responsabilité du dessinateur, Zohoré, quand on...
The responsibility of a cartoonist. When you draw in a country like Ivory Coast, when you have had so much political, physically, because there was a division of the country between North and South, in that case, you have to take into consideration the context. You should not excite or go too far. Sometimes you should remind people of their own responsibilities, but all in all, you have to avoid putting oil on the fire and going from bad to worse. When you feel some problems at the political or social level, we try to ease up the situation as much as we can. During the crisis in 2011, during the post-election crisis in 2011, for instance, we have tried to keep the drama to soften. Babo said he won, and Ouattara said he also won. So we presented Côte d'Ivoire as a special phone, too cheap telephone. There was the Babo cell and Adocom cell, two candidates, two enemies. And then the population was finding funny and used, even recently when Babo returned to Côte d'Ivoire, at that time, we created a list of words, a vocabulary, because when he came out of the plane, when he deplaned, his ex-woman came to welcome him, and it created an incident. And we called it, we gave the title, can you hear me? We called it the title, Babo Levelas. It was used by several series. I don't know if you know the Brazilian Lavelas sitcom, and you find it everywhere in Côte d'Ivoire, in other newspapers. Everybody's using it today. And it is our strength. We always try to ease the situation, to soften the anger. Today, the comeback of Babo is under the water because of his divorce from his ex-wife. And just yesterday, they were appearing in front of the Court of Justice, divorce, to try to get a divorce from his ex-wife. So, Babo Levelas, the Brazilian series. Do you have fields, times, periods, or fields where we should not draw? No cartoon. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to stay put. Not do, because the situation is so acute, so severe.
So situations where we shouldn't be drawing. I don't think so. I don't think there is a situation where it's you should put limitations on yourself. I don't think self-censorship really is the solution for anything. Maybe there is situations like Gado said where you maybe have the choice not to say something, or maybe you don't have, at the end of the day, you are putting your opinion out there. Sometimes you don't have a solid opinion to put, and sometimes you don't have enough information. But certain topics where I feel like you shouldn't be expressing your opinion, and I don't think that's true. No.
Vous qui défendez beaucoup la cause des femmes, par exemple, sur la tradition, sur la religion, il n'y a aucun sujet que vous vous interdisez de représenter?
Sorry, I didn't...
You're very much involved into gender equality. When considering religion, for instance, are there any topics, issues that you just don't want to draw by principle? Or symbols?
If it depends on what kind of cartoon and why are you doing this cartoon? Why are you drawing it? Is it for as a way to like campaign for something. If you are campaigning for something, it's good to have the people you are drawing for on your side. So doing something that's very provocative, for example, and something that's gonna not sit well with, or gonna ridicule some of the beliefs that the society has, it's not gonna be good for whatever you're campaigning for.
It's gonna be counterproductive.
It's gonna be counterproductive, exactly. But if you're doing it for yourself because you wanna express your personal opinion in your social media or whatever, then I don't think that's something that you should be allowed to do. But at the end of the day, I always feel like why are you drawing this cartoon and who are you targeting? And is it just to get something out of your chest, or is it because you want people to be on your side because you want to talk about a certain topic and you want to ally people and to gather people for a certain cause? So putting that in mind, I think it's important.
Et vous, Willis from Tunis, trop risqué?
And you from Tunis, do you think it's too risky, not right for the Tunisian society, not right for the campaign you want to fight for? Have you been asking yourself this question? It's a matter of timing. Sometimes when there is a terrorist crisis, I don't feel like drawing. What am I going to say about a terrorist? What am I going to be able to say except expressing my solidarity with people who are suffering, hurt? But I would be unable to draw anything, a cartoon. It happens too often. But at times, I can feel in my guts there is a lot of tension, and people are very tense. People don't feel well. And I can say this drawing can wait for the day after tomorrow, but the drawing will remain the same. And I will publish it. Maybe not the day where things are very tense and critical. But the goal is for people to read my cartoon, to appreciate it, and understand when you don't feel well. People are not going to understand the cartoon, and it's not going to go through. And I say to myself, it's going to wait 1 or 2 days or more. And when I feel like saying things, I do it. The difficulty is also drawing that people I fight against are not going to understand. And they might say, you see how these artists are bad people. And also when I deal or tackle ideology, when I lampoon this ideology, when I want to critical radical Islamism, I don't want that drawing to be used by the extreme right wing in France. So that drawing has to be efficient enough not to be used by my personal enemies, but this drawing has to be clear enough. At the same time, it's always delicate, difficult. But the fragile power in a region, especially the Arab Spring, a lot of powers have emerged, especially Tunisia is an example of a power which has established democracy. Do you sometimes believe that we have to protect this democratic gain? Criticize what you've not had the power to do during Ben Ali, under Ben Ali. No, democracy, well, we are more in a transition period. We're in the beginning of the democratic transition. It's not there yet. In the immediate years after the transition, just after the Arab Spring, under the Islamic cloud, did you feel there was a comeback of censorship, the blasphemy of profanity, which becomes the new target of censorship? When the new constitution was drawn after the revolution, Ennahda, the Islamic, wanted to deal with Article 6 as to criminalize an attack against a profanity. And they were trying to find every excuse, because we're always attacked from all sides, left and right. Yes, freedom, they don't like freedom. The regime, they don't want us to be free. They have attacked us non-stop because they have non-stop attacked freedom, intellectuals, women, especially women, artists, and it never stopped, and it's still true today. Gado, because of the society where you live, the topics that you don't think are adequate, such as the opposition between Kenyatta and Odinga, two ethnic, during the at the end of the 2000, at the end of 2010. And are you saying the cartoonist has some responsibility on these issues?
Yes, I think we do, but it's also very important to acknowledge the fact that the nature of what we do is going to prick these sensibilities and is going to ask questions, is going to interrogate, is going to cause commotion, is going to provoke thoughts and so forth. That's the nature of what we do, and even the most mild drawings sometimes are seen as sensitive. I think it will be unfortunate if we are to remove that from what we do, from the craft. Since time in antiquity, that must be preserved. That, you know, editorial cartoons are going, to some extent, they will make people laugh, they will provoke thoughts, and they might end up in one way or the other pricking people. I think for me that is very important. That is preserved. It's a reality of editorial cartoons. They will cause. Of course, it's not always intentional, but the nature of the craft allows for that. So it's important for that to be protected. But having said that, yes, and again, you go back to what I said, that you know, for example, in many societies, and where, you know, even in Africa, we are seeing that, you know, there are certain topics that probably, you know, people are not able to discuss. People probably will look to cartoons to discuss these topics. People would look at cartoons to see what are they saying, because that's an outlet also to discuss these issues. And so that is also very important. And so, for example, the issue of you know, the issue of ethnicity, it's a very sensitive issue in many African countries. And cartoons, humor, and satire is able to discuss these things openly. And by using humor, people are able to interact and see the realities that are, you know, that is there. And so that in itself is such a quality with satire that should be protected by all means, because it's an outlet also for us to discuss these sensitive subjects. In Kenya, I mean, I've given an example of the ethnicity, which is always you know, Kenya is a very ethnicized society. You know, you have these ethnic you know, leaders, and sometimes you have even ethnic barons who basically they command a lot of support through their supporters through ethnicity. And so it is very important, for example, for humor to be able actually to point at that in a very humorous, direct, and to provoke thought, so that people should be able to look at it and say, you know, should we follow this leader because he comes from my ethnic group? Should we actually look, you know, at other leaders and so forth and so forth? So it allows actually quite for a lot of discussions, and sometimes that is always lost and it's not seen, but that's very, very important. And I think press editorial cartoons should be, in my view, and satire should be protected by all means.
You've used cartoons and humor to as a critical way of the Chinese presence in Africa. Could you explain exactly what you mean to say by these cartoons? And do you understand that this could raise different reactions in other parts of the globe?
Yes, so obviously China has been a big subject in Africa because of their involvement. And number one for me is that I've never been against the China-Africa cooperation. I think even coming from Tanzania, that is actually, China was a huge partner, you know, from the 60s to 70s to the 80s in Tanzania. I think the bigger, rather Africa is entitled to partner with China in many areas. And I think that has actually given Africa broader options, you know, so it can trade with China, it can trade with Europe, and that's good. What I have done in my drawing most of the time is to interrogate these partnerships. And so it's very important that actually these partnerships, just like, you know, we would question any other partnership, whether it's Europe, whether it is with Russia, that's important. And so a lot of times I've received a lot of criticism from actually the Chinese embassy because of my drawings. I have actually gotten a lot of also some letters and people complaining. But I think it is also missing the point, because a lot of my drawings also have focused on actually asking African leaders and its institution about our dealings with China. So it is not about, a lot of times it's seen as anti-China, but it's actually, it is very much actually looking at these trade deals. So if you look, for example, at the trade deficit between China and Africa, it's very imbalanced, you know, whether it's export and import. And that is important that we question that. We cannot just actually have the deals that they are going on. You cannot have if you are to look at, for example, the loans. You know, like if you look at what the Kenya government has, you know, it has been, you know, and the country now is actually China is the largest loaner to Kenya. So it's important that actually a lot of time we should continue questioning these contracts, these Chinese loans. They must be transparent. We must make them more open. We should actually know, for example, what are the benefits that Africa is getting. We cannot just be sit there and say, oh, you know, and wait and say the Chinese actually are here to build us rail, or they are going to build these bridges and so forth. What is Africa getting in exchange and in a long term? So humor and satire, of course, has been in the forefront in asking these questions. And I personally have actually done a lot of drawings, of course, and I've been attacked very much by certain quarters as being anti-Chinese. There is also the issue of democracy and human rights in China. What happens when actually the Chinese actually supports dictators across the continent? Should we sit quiet and just wait and because they're building roads and bridges? No, I think we should question that. And what is development? What is development? Is development about bridges and contracts and all that? So I think, for me, it's an opportunity to discuss these questions and these views openly, and we should continue, you know, to challenge and ask these questions about the relationship between China and Africa. It should face the scrutiny every day, and it's important that we raise these questions.
Zohoré, c'est un sujet porteur, ça, pour les années à venir, pour les dessinateurs de presse.
Zohoré, do you think that for the years to come, this is a topic? The Western presence has been caricatured in Africa. Do you think the Chinese presence it will be the same? for the years to come. Yes, I believe there's a battle, you know, between the Russians, the Chinese, the French on the African continent. And I think it's a topic that we need to address. We haven't addressed that topic so much unless when there is a very burning issue at the international level. But I believe these topics need to be addressed because they are recurring in Africa, even in Côte d'Ivoire. Maybe not the Russian presence, but the Chinese presence is stronger and stronger. So those, I think, African cartoonists need to look into this and give their opinion through their cartoons. Another topic that we've seen in different cartoons, the topic of migration, we've seen that in Tunis. And it's difficult to show humor. Yes, it's very difficult to be humorous. It's better to raise awareness. In Côte d'Ivoire, for example, it's a real phenomenon. You probably heard that there are many Ivorians amongst the migrants who die at sea. In Côte d'Ivoire, you know, we hear that it's not necessarily the truth, that some people pretend to be Ivorians and they're not Ivorians, but that's too complicated. But we know there are many Ivorians dying at sea. During the latest Coco Bull that we organized, the topic was the clandestine migration. And we asked the International Maritime Organization, and also there are candidates for migration who came back to Côte d'Ivoire to testify. And so we're trying to raise some awareness rather than using humor. And so with Cartooning for Peace, we are working on this. Now, in Tunis, the topic of migration, when you do your cartoons, is it for the Tunisian public opinion or for the Westerners? Is it the bad conscience of the Westerners? It's for both. It's for Europeans, but also to show another look, to explain the reasons why they're leaving their country. And very often it's because they are hopeless. And we talk about migrants, you know, but in fact they are individuals and they tend to be forgotten. We tend to forget why some people had to leave their life, their family, to join a European dream. And I'm trying to show that when people leave, it's because they do not have any hopes in their country. You know, they are unemployed. There's a lot of misery. I organize a lot of workshops in Tunisia. I've organized some workshops in detention camps for minors and with cartooning for peace, people working on torture. And I had those people draw, and they tend to draw boats and the Italian flag and Lampedusa. So the dream is to leave, you know. And I'm talking about young people in a difficult situation. But when I talk to other social classes, young people, their dream is to leave. And I denounce that in my cartoons, the fact that they don't want to stay. I denounce the reason why they're leaving. And sometimes I run out of arguments to tell them that they should stay. So that's why, you know, the social distancing and the barrier. Yes, I've drawn a parallel with the health crisis with the Tunisian and Libya and Algeria. Well, this is for the French, right? When you're talking about the barrier gestures. Well, I was drawing a parallel with what was happening in Europe with all this social distancing and the reality in our countries. Well, today we're living the same thing, but I wanted to say that we are distant. well, the conflicts in Sudan, the wars, have led to many displaced people. The displacement of populations is a topic that you feel you have a responsibility for in Sudan?
Do I feel like I have the responsibility to discuss
To
these
depict this social reality?
I haven't done that much, and
Or to raise consciousness?
but yeah, it is something to talk about, because the living situation, especially now in Sudan, is kind of deteriorating, and the economic situation is getting worse, and the people find it, even with the hopes that came with the revolution and everything, still people are finding it very hard to stay in Sudan and to be able to just go about everyday life with very main problems happening, and like very main. If you spend your whole day looking for like basic things and spending so much time to get your basic needs, it is very hard to stay in a situation like this. And as much as we are advocating, yes, of course, of building a new Sudan and everything, but also at the same time, you just feel sometimes for your people, it's not something that you. I'm not going to be advocating for people to stay, for example, if it's better for you and your family to leave the country if it doesn't give you what you need. So it is like I feel that
balancing
confliction within myself. So it's maybe a reason why I haven't been talking about it so much, because I have that conflict that even within myself. So whether to stay after we're trying to bring change to the country, or to leave because you just need to live a life that is just easier for you and for your family, basically.
Merci. Je crois qu'il nous reste un quart d'heure.
Thank you very much. I think we still have 15 minutes, so maybe we could take questions from the audience, and I will summarize the question.
Voilà, je ne sais pas si vous avez compris. Alors, do you understand? Oui. Alors, en fait, ce que disait
So,
donc,
in
Madame,
fact, what the lady was saying, she heard you say several times that a good cartoonist should not take side, that a good cartoonist does not have any God. So should you be an anarchist to be a good cartoonist? Well, I think we all have our own personality. No, we're not going to have the same sensitivity on the same topic. There are things that I'm going to forbid myself from drawing, but Nadia will have no limits, and so on and so forth. Then, it is the people who are looking at the drawing that are going to consider whether it's a good cartoonist or not. But I think it depends on your own personality. It's like political parties. There are different obediences, Same thing for cartoonists. Clearly speaking, in our culture is going to influence the way we see things. Now, is a cartoonist held to impartiality, Gado? Yeah, I think it would be better.
I think I'd like to chip into what Zohoré has said, and I agree with him. But also, it's important to understand that there is a difference on taking a position and supporting a side. So I don't support any political sides, but I take positions on issues, and that is I don't shy away or not. That's a fact. There are issues that I take a position. Sometimes those positions align with certain politicians and certain political parties. So issues like human rights, issues like democratic rights and freedom of press, those I take strong positions, and including local positions or economic or social issues. And
even
so,
when it pits you against certain political leaders.
Yes. It's very important that it pits you with certain political. It's very important. That is. But yes, it's good, if you actually don't take sides, because that might be a little bit difficult. And political parties are political parties. they fall under certain ideologies and all that. And so that is also challenging. Now, in continents like, or countries like United States, you have cartoonists that are support the right, and you have cartoonists that support the left. And it's a very common tradition. And I find it problematic at times, but I would like to insist that it's important that to take position on issues. Your drawings should be on issues as opposed to political parties.
Nadia Chiari, ni Dieu ni maître ou bien à gauche toute? Comment est-ce qu'on se positionne?
Nadia Chiari, neither God nor any master. Well, for me, the enemy is the power. So the topic of my drawings will be to draw against the power. I've never been in favor of any political party, and I will never do. So you don't want to serve political parties. You want to take some distance, and you want to criticize and to challenge the order, and you don't want to do the propaganda for any political party. That's not our role. You told me before we had a discussion over lunchtime, and you said we need to pinpoint the failures of a democratic government, even if it's a weak one. That's our role.
Yeah, I think, like Nadia said, the role of a cartoon sometimes is to push limits, and it's to question authority. And if you are fully supporting one political party or something, it's really hard to make that role, and it's really hard to make that to get because you're always going to be biased. You're always going to be your drawings will be just in favor of someone just because you are from the outside supporting the party. So it's really good to for a cartoonist to always also be commenting on certain issues, and it's always good to raise concerns and to make people think. It's a way to just push boundaries and criticize authority. And if you have a certain path that you're going, it's hard to make that question. It's kind of, yeah.
Thank you. Une autre question de la salle?
Another question?
Je ne sais pas si tout le monde a... Enfin oui, je crois que tout le monde a entendu. Allez-y, je vous laisse répondre.
Je ne sais pas si je suis impartial. J'essaie de...
I don't know whether I am unbiased or not. I don't think I am unbiased.
C'est vraiment en tant que... Par exemple, même si un politicien,
but let's say, even if a politician, man or woman, that I find interesting is being accused of bribery or conflict of interest, I will criticize the person, even if the person is on my side. So I try to remain neutral in that sense. And I don't meet with politicians because this could influence somebody. You know, if you know the person. No, I stay far away from ties. You know, I don't like ties. Well, we meet with them, but we criticize them when necessary. Okay, thank you very much.
Merci à Nadia Chiari alias Willis from Tunis. Merci à Alaa Satir, à Zohoré et à Godfrey Mwambemwa Gado. Et merci à vous tous.